Hello, fellow Shakedowners, and thank you very much indeed for inviting me back to answer some questions. John Hindaugh here, in case you hadn't already guessed. I'll just take them in the order that they come, although there's a couple that are fairly similar. Dot on Cam, and there was another one further down. Stand by, caller, and I'll go down here a little bit. Nathan Stewart, both asking about GT3s with hybrid engines. Nathan saying, will they be introduced gradually within their own class and be restricted so traditional engine cars still be the fastest? Will they try to integrate them, intend to BOP them with normal engine cars? How would you do that, given the added weight of the hybrid powertrain? You make very, very good points. I'll take the second part of your question in a moment, Nathan, about other tracks in Australia for international GT3. GT3 and hybrids. This has been talked about for quite a long time, and although no names, no pack drill, I've spoken to most of the major manufacturers, and they simply don't want them. Not right now, at least. Up until certainly 6 months or a year ago, when I spoke to most of them, we're in a time of change for GT3 with the ACO and the FIA regulations, SRO, even by Stefan Rattel's admission, losing a bit of their influence in global GT3. In fact, Stefan said to me, they probably had 85-90% of global GT, and that's dropped considerably now when you consider the intervention or the extra involvement of FIA and ACO. The current crop of GT3 cars are all fairly new, so you've got the new Ferrari, the new Porsche coming up. You'll have the new Ford and the new Corvette. Undoubtedly, you've got new BMW as well. Everybody else is going that way, either with hybrids or brand new versions of the cars. So they've got to have a lifespan. So nothing's going to change, in my opinion, in the next few years. The manufacturers would rather not introduce the complications of hybrid cars to GT3 in what is, for the most part around the world, a customer team based formula. Yes, there are big races. Yes, not bigger than Le Mans 24, of course, which now will become the biggest and most important GT3 in the world, a GT3 event in the world. Spa, the biggest and most important GT3 only event in the world, and I make that distinction deliberately. But generally speaking, people who are out there are running with, the vast majority of them at least, with private teams and with Pro-Am drivers. And do they need the extra complication? Probably not. Do they need the extra... they're not light cars. Most of the GT3 cars already, if you added another probably a couple of 100 kilograms to them, possibly even a little bit more, that would make them a very heavy race car indeed. Or would you trim weight out of them in other places? Would you mandate smaller engines? Is it still a GT car if it has a 4-cylinder 2-litre engine boosted by an hybrid? Road car technology is coming on very quickly. I hear rumours from Porsche that the next 911 will be have some kind of hybrid, whether it's self-charging hybrid or plug-in. I'm not sure whether I believe that at the moment, but road car technology will drive this. Ultimately, marketing and marketeers tend to drive what's going on in motorsport and drive manufacturers to be involved rather than engineering departments and engineers. I think probably not for the short term. And for all the things that you mentioned, Nathan, actually, how difficult it would be to integrate. I think when you go, you've got to go totally, and everybody's got to have one. You will know that there are some GT cars, GT3 cars, where their road-going cousins, siblings, are already hybrids, NSX for example, where the race cars aren't. And there's, I think, good reason for that. When it does come, if it does come, then I think everybody's got to be hybridised. I wouldn't put it past the governing bodies to do something like they have with GTP and LMDH, which is standardised hybrid components. So standardised battery pack, so nobody gets any advantage there. Standardised motor generator, and then free up other things around it. Packaging it in a GT card, is that easier or more difficult than in a prototype when you've got a car that's homologated for road use as well? That's an engineering question, isn't it? So, long answer to a shortish question. Thank you, Nathan, and Dotan as well. I think we're going to be with what we've got for the foreseeable future, possibly as long as 5 years, maybe even longer. As to your second part of the question, apart from the 12-hour, what track in Australia would you like to see more international GT teams come here and compete at? Oh my goodness, you've got so many tracks down in Australia and New Zealand that would suit GTs. A GT3 race, some version of the Bend, that would keep Crailsey happy. And nice to see that Crailsey's been on here and offered to buy my... Oh no, give it to me, he said. I thought you wanted to buy my 968. I'll tell you what, Crailsey, you pay for it to get down under and you can be the custodian for a while. I'll put that out to you now. He's probably now going to find a deal for that. He'll make me stand by that. The Bend, definitely. But, I mean, you've got so many great tracks that you could use. None of them are Bathurst. None of them are Mount Panorama, of course. I think, in terms of internationally, it would depend on, and attracting international teams, it would depend on whether there was a series for them, whether it was a round of the Intercontinental GT Challenge. And this kind of runs into Brad. Hello, Brad. Keep up the good work on the site and on the forums. Says, with the date change for the Bathurst 12 hours, are you hearing if there's much interest from North American teams in entering? Yes, there is. I'm not sure with even the move to later on in the month of February that it helps the teams, because that is still insanely short amount of time to actually re-prep a car and get it to the other side of the world. So in terms of taking their own machinery and coming to compete at the Bathurst 12 hours, I'm not sure whether the date helps. It certainly helps drivers and or team members. What I think you might see, even if not this coming event, but if it stays this way in the future, a potential of more collaborations between American and European-based teams who perhaps are involved in Daytona. And let's not forget, Daytona, with GT3s, that's a big race. That's the first big American race of the season. It's the 24-hour race. The watches are up for grabs. And it's a lot of points for the full season IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship. It's also a 4-hour race for the Michelin Pilot Challenge GT4 teams, some of whom either have ambitions in GT3 or already have GT3 teams as well. So that's a lot of work on that weekend. And the logistics of getting a car around the world, I mean, you'd have to fly it. And whilst the flight freight costs, try saying that quickly after a few beers, the flight freight costs have come down, and whilst they aren't quite as cheap as they used to be, certainly it's an option for manufacturer teams. But then again, manufacturer teams, so out of GTD Pro, let's say, the manufacturer teams, Corvette, possibly, Ford, I'd say Ford Odd most definitely. But would they not rather pal up with somebody already in region, and the new cars, of course, of Corvette and Ford aren't homologated for 2024, but for 2025, different question. So that's the other side of this. A lot of these cars are so new that the factory teams, even if they wanted to be at Bathurst, and they all want to be at Bathurst for the 12 hours, perhaps they wouldn't have the opportunity to because of the homologation situation. But I think it helps. It certainly helps in terms of getting to Bathurst not feeling completely wiped out, even if you start race week as a driver, as a broadcaster, as a journalist, as anybody who's making that trip straight from Daytona on either the Sunday night or the Monday morning and getting in either Tuesday or Wednesday to Sydney. JDM, here's a question that comes up once in a while. Do you have a favourite race you've announced? He says, I don't know the full expanse of your careers. I've only known GT3 race cars since 2019. I remember you announcing Bentley's Bathurst win. That'll remain etched in my brain forever. That's very kind, JDM, working with a good team. That certainly is one that I'll remember. British team, people I knew in that as well. I've fortunate enough to have spent a lot of time in GT and endurance racing paddocks around the world in various different series, and that does, Bathurst tends to be a bit of a melting pot for everybody. It's the race, really speaking, that everybody wants to do. That it's so different from everything else, from the start in the dark to the track itself to the legendary status of it, and just the feel of the event. So that does stand up there. My first Bathurst, so 10 years ago now, first of anything really. So first Bathurst, first Le Mans back in 1989. I apologise for not getting to Australia until my 50th year on the planet. That was a massive. That was a massive mistake on my part, and particularly given that there's a vague family connection with a cousin many times removed from the Hindaugh family, as you probably know, Bruce Hindaugh Gowan engines that powered Rocky's Tirana that won back in the 70s, and so that was an oversight on my part. First Le Mans was 89. That's the Mercedes win. First Petit Le Mans, been thinking a lot about that recently as well, back in 1988, before there was even a Le Mans, American Le Mans series. The 333, as Joe Bradley rightly remembered, coming down the hill underneath what is now the Fox Factory Bridge, the fireworks coming off, and that's amazing event. My first time in America, that as well. So a lot of firsts in there, and moments in races, yes, probably. Le Mans always a highlight every year. The stock answer is to say the last race and the next race, isn't it? You know, because they're kind of most etched on your mind for what you've done, and you're looking forward. Which is the one you remember most? Which is the one you're looking forward to most? And the one I remember most is the one I've just done before I download everything to get into the next one. And the one that I'm looking forward to most is the next one, because it's the next one. So still this year, got WEC at Bahrain, which I'll jump in and help our regular crew of Bruce Jones and Johnny Palmer, because that's an 8-hour. So we'll jump in and help them with that. And then we've got the Kuwait Creventic race as well before the end of the calendar year. And I mean, this year I've been very fortunate. We've seen some great racing. Some good races in Porsche Deluxe Carrera Cup North America. I've been doing Carrera Cup Asia, and they've had some good races too. I mean, for consistency, right throughout the IMSA, particularly the IMSA, which forms the most part of my work, of course, the series that's continued to deliver. And I mean, it's been great in WeatherTech, it's been great in Michelin Pilot Challenge, but undoubtedly the season that delivers, or the series that delivers consistency, has got to be Idemitsu Mazda MX-5. I'm sure you saw the season stats, and I apologise if I get these wrong, but I'm not exaggerating. I think the average winning margin this year of races that didn't finish under a safety car. And by the way, Idemitsu Mazda MX-5 Challenge must be the only category of racing in the world where if you finish under a safety car, the margin of victory between first and second is likely to be longer than if you finished under green. I think the average was about a tenth, or just on a tenth, just under a tenth. And for the whole season, if you add the gaps between first and second together on races that didn't end under safety car, it was just over 2 seconds, which is extraordinary on a, 16 race calendar or whatever it is. It's been brilliant. It will continue to be brilliant. Hopefully we'll be talking about it again next year. So JDM, impossible to answer. I've been calling races. Well, I've been doing Le Mans since 89. I've been doing American since 98. I did some karting and various bits and pieces since then. I used to do some rallycross in the UK. I did do 20 years of Race of Champions as well, where the races come thick and fast. Thoroughly enjoyed that. I've done two wheels. I've done rallying. I've done off-road. Pretty much everything. And it's been brilliant. And as I say, it's almost impossible, but you picked out a good one there. Bathurst 2019, wasn't it, that, of Bentley. Hello to Bruce Raymond. Not a question here. He says, can I buy you lunch the week before the 12 hour? You should have asked somebody about that because I've got a large appetite. But thank you very much for that. Cameron Shaw, I think only slightly tongue-in-cheek here, says, what was it like working with EA on Need for Speed Pro Street and witnessing the rise of the greatest driver who ever lived, Ryan Cooper? Cameron, actually, in all honesty, that was a really interesting project. And I made some very good friends at EA for that. It was an unusual working process back in those days because although we have always done a little bit of remote working, and I've always been used to doing a little bit of remote working in the motor racing trade, obviously we had to do all of that completely remotely. And so the best way to do that back then was for me to record it locally. And so then the issue is, how do you then get produced? Well, fortunately, I had an ISDN line, which is a high-quality broadcast type line. So rather than even compressing it onto that, which is only 128K, so 64K either side of the line of two lines, you record it locally at the highest level that you can. Then the producers listen in as you're doing it live and make comments back to you. So what we had to do before we even started, and bear in mind I hadn't seen any parts of the finished game because it was very secret at the time, that the sound designers came up, and script writers came up with a way of being able to judge where we were in the game and what sort of emotions the commentary and the voiceover had to have. Now, some poor soul, I'll tell you now, when I first saw the script, I was immediately impressed because quite often when I do voiceovers, and particularly when they want them to accurately reflect what I might have said at the time or the kind of language that I would use and the phraseology I would use, you look at them and say, well, I would never have said that. I wouldn't have used that word. I wouldn't have used that phrase. That is more American than English, let's say, or maybe that's more European than English. And when the first scripts came through from EA, man, it was like I'd written them myself. And when I asked about this, I found out that some poor soul had listened to about the last 2 or 3 Le Mans recordings, which are up on the archive at radio-show.co.uk, of course, as is everything else that we do. And then listen to some other stuff that we'd done, some of the shorter races that we'd done, some of the other programming that we'd done, the road tests and everything, to be able to get an idea of how I would talk about things. And I'm sure they're probably still going around with my voice in their head, poor so-and-sos, given that they had to listen to so much of it. Anyway, it was brilliant. And the words were already good, so then we had to just come up with this idea of what emotion, what you were, was I being conciliatory? Was I being encouraging? Was it just straight commentary? Was there a bit of sarcasm in the voice because somebody had failed at a challenge again? So we put it all on a big spreadsheet with the words, where it came in the game, at what part of the story, what was before it, what was after it, and then a sort of fun, a 1 to 10 rating of whether it was funny, sarcastic, encouraging, and all the different emotions. We had about 5 or 6 categories, and tried to do it like that. And then basically, I sat down. Actually, I didn't. I stood up because, as you know, that's how I prefer to do things. With the sound producers in my ears from the United States, from the Pacific Northwest, and from EA, and started going through them. And they would ask me to do it a little way this way, a little way that way, a bit faster, a bit slower, a bit happier, a bit sadder. And we probably would work about 3 hours at a time and break that up into probably an hour or 90 minutes of recording, save it, send it, or save it, start another recording, and then send it at the end of the session. Round about 3.5, 4 hours at a time was about as much as you could do without starting to get tired. And actually, we did it rather quicker than they expected. They budgeted in for, I think, 14 or 15 sessions to do all of the voices in the game. And I mean, it's a lot of work. And fair play to these people who do this. There's a huge amount that goes on behind the scenes for all of these. And when I think of other things like, you know, the soccer games, where you've got commentators who are having to talk about individual players for all of the soccer players in the world, even if it's just saying their name, you know, 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 times in different ways. You know, I can't even begin to imagine how much work goes into that. But anyway, we knocked it off in about 8 or 9 sessions. And as I was getting paid by the sessions, I should have really made more of that and made more mistakes, I think. It was really challenging. Concentration levels had to be up, but you had to sound natural. And I've got to say, it was something very different from what I'd done before. But I enjoyed the challenge, and the guys at EA and the game's production made it really, really good fun. And when I worked with them much later on various other things, it was good to get back and see them again. Also, Richard Westhead said, "I've just started playing Pro Street. I forgot Hindy was in this." Yes, they didn't, for some reason. I never really got the bottom of this. I suspect they would have had to pay me more. I've still got an IMDb listing for it, but they wanted me to use another name. And here's another story behind that, Richard and Cameron and Jesse. I'll come to you in a moment on this matter. They had the name of the character that I played was eventually became Roger Evans. They actually wanted to call the character Richard Hammond. And I said to them, "Richard Hammond? Well, why don't you just get Richard Hammond to do it?" And they said, "Why? Who's Richard Hammond? Is it a real person?" I went, "Yes. You know, he's from Top Gear." And it was like, "Oh, really? Oh, right. Well, we can't have that. We don't want it to be a real person." So one of the guys that worked with us then behind the scenes was a lad called Dave Evans. I was Roger. It might have been Roger Hammond. Might have been Roger Hammond, not rather than Richard Hammond. But I said Hammond is Richard Hammond from Top Gear, and they said, "Well, we're going to have to change the name." And so I said, "Right, one of the guys that works with us is Dave Evans. He works really hard behind the scenes, and he was one of our original studio gophers and organisers and drivers when we took over Le Mans. When I took over Le Mans, actually, when I was working for Haymarket." and known to me from the northeast of England. Top bloke, very down to earth. And so it ended up being Roger Evans, and I told Dave this, and of course he's delighted about it. But yeah, they wanted it to be Hammond in the first place. Cameron Shaw says, what do you think of the, and I hope I get this right, is it Pepega or Pepega community mod for Pro Street? I went and looked that up. It's fantastic. It's absolutely fantastic. I'll tell you something. When COVID hit, I unplugged the PlayStation and the Xbox, and they're still sitting behind me in the studio now gathering dust, because I knew if I didn't do that, I'd never see the sunshine again when we weren't moving around. I feel I might have to get them updated and start again, and that's a great community mod there. It looks absolutely fantastic. Hello to Ant. Now, I'm going to just check I've done all of them above here before I skim down. Dalton, JDM, Brad, Bruce, Cameron, Richard and Jesse. Yeah. Right. Anthony Johnson. Hello, Anthony. Or Anthony. What's the most comfortable comms box and the least comfortable, and which comms box gives the highest level of complexity, variability, to see the pits and on track versus seeing on the action via screens in a box? Well, Anthony, that's a very good question. By far, the best view that we get in terms of being able to look on the track would go to probably 3, and it'd be a toss-up between any of the 3. It will surprise you not at all to know that Daytona is one of them, because obviously the track is laid out right in front of you, and we are right above the start-finish line, next to race control, on virtually the top level of that new Daytona building. And it's super, and at night it's particularly good. We can see probably 95% of the track. There's a couple of little places, just the exit of the pits, the pit wall, which comes out in after the first complex of corners and before the International Horseshoe on the infield. If a car stops there, the wall is just too high for us to see it. Exactly the same if somebody goes off driver's right and goes straight on at what would be turn 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, turn 6, 7, that goes back onto the oval at Speedway turn 1. If somebody goes straight on there, again, the tyre wall's just a little bit high, but pretty... I don't know, if somebody falls off at the newly named Le Mans, the bus stop chicane, and gets tight into the wall, again, driver's left there. Again, it's an issue to identify the car there. But other than that, we can... I mean, you can... I take a pair of binoculars, and you can do the old-fashioned, almost horse racing of calling... And sometimes we do that when we don't have TV pictures for the early sessions. We can call a car round the track with a pair of binoculars, which is very unusual. The other 2 places that we can do that are both in the Middle East, actually. Q8, which was new to us last year, a new purpose-built circuit just outside of Q8 City, a circuit and motor park, really. They've got a drag strip, a couple of karting circuits, some off-road stuff there. They built a very lovely north-south pit lane with a nice overhang over the top of the commentary box, which sits right at the top of the grandstands. North-south is great because it tends to mean that you very seldom, if ever, get direct sunlight in the pit lane. We're undercover there, so we don't get under the cantilever roof, so you don't get sunshine into the commentary box, which is a nightmare in some places. Commentary boxes tend to be all white inside, so they get very hot. They reflect the light as well, and that means it's nearly impossible to see your screens. So that's another good one. And Dubai International Circuit, same thing, right up on the top of a grandstand. That's one of the bigger ones that we have as well. And we can see probably 80-85% of that. You can't quite see going through turn 1 and turn 2 because there's a little bit of a raised area on what's called the hill circuit there. So you lose them for maybe a second or so through that bit, and there's a tiny bit on the far side as they're coming back up the hill where you lose them out of sight as well. But we've always got the TV pictures to fall back on. The most comfortable comms box I ever had. Oh, well, two that we don't use anymore. I think the first one we only did once. We were in a suite. We're often in odd places, particularly in the a few years ago, in the early years of what we were doing in the US for the American Le Mans Series Radio Web, and even for IMSA Radio, we've had some weird ones. I once had a broadcast from with the sound desk on the top of the sink and the cooker in an RV at that was at VIR. And Jeremy was sitting in one of the captain's chairs, turned around, looking out the front screen of said RV to be able to lap chart the cars as they were going up through the uphill S's there, the snake. That was just an odd one, but we did have a fridge, which is nice. The most opulent one was a hospitality suite at Charlotte Motor Speedway, but it wasn't just a hospitality suite; it was the owners, Humpty Wheeler's hospitality suite, which was somewhat decadent, as you can imagine, with Doric columns and murals on the wall and very, very comfy seats. So we were down at the front of that, and the rest of the support team, who were doing all the website stuff and posting pictures and all that sort of stuff, were up on the upper level. So that was pretty cool. Nürburgring, we've had a couple of good ones at the Nürburgring for the 24 hours. Can't see much of the track, if any, of the track from the first one I'm going to mention. But as you know, Aston Martin were the people who got us involved in the Nürburgring, and without them, we would never have started broadcasting there. And for their early years, they hired what was then the Jaguar Lounge, which became the Aston Martin Lounge, actually. They actually took on the contract, and it became known as, but it was the Jaguar Lounge in the first few years that we were there. And we had this nice little place around the corner from the main lounge, which is where you've got to remember. So this was open all the way through the race. The first few years we didn't broadcast all of the race, but we gradually got deeper and deeper into the night. And even when the TV pictures finished, we just worked off the timing screens and generated some content. But we're in a full service hospitality suite, which was huge. It was on the pit-in end of the Nürburgring Grand Prix circuit in the TUV Tower, and it's full service, so you can pop round the corner and grab yourself a bite to eat. It's fabulous when you've got a small team and you haven't got time to nip away. We pulled a couple of the sofas together so people could have a bit of a snooze when we did start to go through the night. But also, it had waiter and waitress service alcoholic drinks, and that was interesting, to say the least. Every few moments, with typical German efficiency, somebody would pop round and say, "Would you like a drink? Can we get you anything? Cocktail?" And so for the first few years, it was probably just as well we didn't go through the night. We learned to be somewhat abstemious, of course, but that was pretty comfy. We then moved to the Aston Martin, to a smaller Aston Martin lounge, over the pits, which was at Pit Out, which originally was a VIP lounge, and then it just became the driver's resting area. And then for the last couple of times, we were back in the big lounge, and now we're back in the commentary boxes, which are over the other side, which are nowhere near as salubrious. Where else is pretty good in terms of comfortable and least comfortable? Least comfortable, it's probably not fair to say, but in my British touring car days, we worked in some weird and wonderful places. When I was working for ITV Sport, I remember at Knock Hill, not necessarily least comfortable, but possibly least appropriate. We were in a commentary box overlooking the start-finish line, and it was Simon Hill, Jake Hill's dad, British touring car driver himself now, Jake, very accomplished driver. Simon had been a good driver himself. And Simon and I were in the small box with all the TV equipment, and it was raining so hard that there was actually a feature waterfall down the back of the commentary door. That was quite interesting because the seal wasn't sealing. Now, in fairness, it was raining very hard. Other places that have been odd, Sao Paulo, Brazil. We were in a very nice commentary box, which had been used. It was the BBC box actually for Formula One, the BBC radio box for Formula One. So it was quite large. It was right on the end, so you did have a little bit of a view into the pits and down into the first corner, as I remember. And we had a key for it, so we stuck all of our gear in. We set it all up on the first day, and then as we were leaving, we realised that the air conditioning unit, which should have been in the one of those big holes in the wall that you sort of slip in, had at some stage hadn't been refitted. So there was a large hole in the wall, which, and I'll tell you how large it is, I could have crawled through it. And so we thought, well, that's not very secure. And as we'd already seen security guards letting their mates in at the end of the day to have a wander round the circuit, we decided that it was probably, as all of the equipment was broadcast critical, and bear in mind in those days we were doing the radio, so Eve raised the money to do the audio commentary for what was the nascent years of the WEC. In fact, before it was the WEC, LMC as well. And to help them with their international broadcast, we gave them our commentary for the television. So it was pretty critical that all the gear that we'd taken, and we got very good at getting stuff on planes' hand luggage in a big Pelly case. And we basically had to de-rig it every night, take it out of the circuit and bring it back the next morning early and then re-rig it. And then then there always had to be somebody in the box. That was interesting. Where else? Odd places that we have commentated from. Oh, well, I once did a race at Zolder, two races at Zolder, on my own, endurance races at Zolder. Practice qualifying in the race, and it was very short notice, and I did it from the front seat of a van with all of the screens just basically propped up against the dashboard, and I put a flat surface on the steering wheel that I could use to write my notes on. And in the States, we once did the St. Pete's, what would have been the ALMS in those days, from the loading dock of the theatre, which is inside the environs of the track. And another time, Jeremy and I did... Well, actually, a few times, Jeremy and I did it from pit lane side rather than from the opposite pit lane side, which is where we did it most latterly. Jeremy and I did it at the back of a hospitality cabana on the pit lane side of Long Beach. Now, when I say cabana, I mean this is not a building. This was an completely open... It did have a roof. It had a canvas roof, like a cabana, fluttering around in a few palm trees in pots. But we were effectively at the back of a hospitality cabana. Sadly, none of the hospitality made it to us. So that was quite interesting. However, and I've just thought of this one, in some ways the best and the worst place that we've commentated from in terms of it being unsuitable and uncomfortable, but probably the most goosebump inspiring is the early days of Le Mans. Because if you know the track, come through the Fort Chicane, over the start-finish line, grandstands both sides. Pits on the right, what's called the ACO Tribune on the left. And we used to be on a balcony in what amounted to chicken coops, we used to call them. And there were plywood boards basically delineating small, were single person pretty much commentary areas where we used to put a couple of screens on and we'd build another little thing to put the sound desk on. And I would stand in one. If you were lucky, you could squeeze a guest in alongside you. Trustwell would be in the next one along, divided by a Perspex screen, long before the days of COVID. Perspex out in front of you and corrugated sort of perspex sheeting that people used to put on the top of carports back in the 1960s and 70s. I remember helping my dad build one of those when I was probably about 10 or 11 in the backyard of where we were living at the time. And that was it. Open at the back. And the reason it was uncomfortable was there was nowhere for you to sit, and you couldn't even really put a chair down. We managed to find a tall chair for Paul to do his stuff. But it was so loud that you literally couldn't talk to each other unless you had your headset on. And even then, it was marginal. I don't think you'd get away with it nowadays. But it was so evocative. So evocative. You could see directly down into the pits. So again, set of binoculars. If you leaned forward and stretched and looked to your right, you could see the cars coming just out of the Porsche curves into what's now called Corvette curve, and then through a bit of the Ford chicane, and you lean forward and look to your left, you could see them going up towards Dunlop chicane. Absolutely outstanding in terms of the emotion, and particularly at the start when everybody was coming through. But really completely unsuitable. The TV boxes, so they were just the radio boxes. The TV boxes were beautifully enclosed behind us with aircon and all that sort of stuff. Because the other thing, of course, you were out in the elements. If it was cold, you froze. If it rained, you had to keep everything off the floor and lift the cables up. If it was hot, you cooked. Some of our Continental audio colleagues and some of the people who used to commentate on the support races didn't bother using the lavatories and just relieved themselves where they stood, which meant when it was hot it got very awfully smelly. And is that actually water running down from the rain that's going down between my feet and going on all of our cables? I don't want to think otherwise kind of situation. That was turned a few years ago, and when we all moved down into the TV compound, even the TV commentators, that was turned into a hospitality unit, which it is to this day. And this leads me to this year at Le Mans, the 100th anniversary of the running. Bob Dawson, affectionately known as Brilliant Bob, all of our equipment is up on that level. And so our radio mic receivers and transmitters, our FM transmitter is up on the roof of that building. We run fibre across to it, so our fibre terminations are there. We have data going backwards and forwards so that we can control things, and we have a little camera there to make. And all the broadcasters who have pit comms have got stuff down there, and even some of the teams have got their pits to car radio up there as well. There's an area off to the pit in side of that on driver's left that is specifically reserved for technical equipment for all the broadcasters and for the teams. And so we've got quite a bit of kit up there. And I think it was on Friday, I was talking to Bob. We were sharing the same house as always. And he said, oh, by the way, I've fixed up a commentary position for you up there. And I said, there's nowhere for us to commentate. It's hospitality now. That's a hospitality balcony. He said, okay, I'll talk you through it tomorrow morning. So we went in on Saturday morning. And he gives me a tiny little box, which looks like the kind of things that a floor manager would use. You plug a headset into it, it's got a couple of buttons on it, and then you plug a cable into the bottom, except the cable isn't an XLR cable, isn't an audio cable, it's a RJ45 cable for internet. So he said there's a yellow cable that's up there, it's got Radio Le Mans written on it. If you go up there, plug that in the bottom, wait 15 seconds, you'll be able to talk to us. And you'll be able to still talk to the studio on TalkBack, and we can talk to you, and you can talk to the two pit reporters, and they can talk to you. So why don't you go and do the countdown to green from up there? That's a great idea. There's a whole story about almost not getting to the countdown to green as well, but we'll save that for another day. So I got up there. Joe Blaisdell was with me, our fabulous, one of our fabulous team members, who is not only one of the best technical assistants we've ever had, but he also helps out Eve and Jackie with the social media, and in fact he's just snagged himself a job at Bremont watch company in the UK as their social media person. Smashing lad. So he comes up with these social media cameras and all that sort of bit so that we can record this for posterity. So first of all, it's a great view, particularly of all the build-up. So I plug in and it all goes perfectly to plan. And we do the countdown to green. Well, it all goes perfectly to plan in the point that the tech all works, which is mega. But Pooh and Nick and Diana can't get to anybody on the grid because they could not see the ground. They couldn't see the cars. They couldn't see the drivers. I had the advantage of being up, 4 stories, 5 stories. Actually, no, it's the 6th star, sixième étage. 6 stories up. And I could look down, and I don't think I could see a piece of tarmac other than the bits around the cars. They put the cars not just backs to the wall, they put them right in the middle of the start-finish straight so people could walk past them and mingle at both sides. It was incredible, an incredible sight. And so we start the show. We tried to get a couple of interviews, and we did get 1 or 2. I did the Roll of Honour, and then Di and Nick got into full flow. So I sign off at about 10 minutes to the hour to Bruce Jones and Blackpool Johnny Palmer, who are doing the start of the race. So that's it for me. Countdown to green. Finish countdown to green. Coming up next, it's the start of the race with Johnny Palmer. So Johnny Palmer starts the race and does the build-up and the start to run round on the... eventually the cars start to roll on the formation lap. And Bruce is saying something, and Johnny comes in my ear and said, okay, so this is what I'm going to do. And this was brilliant from Johnny, actually, on reflection. He says, so you're still there, aren't you? I said, yeah, I'm going to stop and stay up here and watch them start the race. He says, yeah, okay. He said, so I'm going to come to you. As they come out of Porsche curves, you should be able to see them. I'm going to throw it to you. You do the start of the race. I said, really? He said, yeah, do the start of the race from up there. And we have effects mics up there as well. We have our own stereo effects mics up there as well. So, okay. Wow, thanks. So, we did that. And I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. And go and listen to it of how it worked. And I think it worked pretty well. And given that we weren't really prepared for it, we hadn't planned for it, I think it was a fitting way to get that particular edition of the race underway. And fair play to JP and to Bruce Jones in the pit lane, in the studio rather, which is in the TV compound, which doesn't have a view. It's basically 2 porta cabins tacked together, which we hire, and then we bring all the kit to put into it. So some of you will have seen the pictures. We start with an empty box and end up with a studio, a green room area, and a production area. And then we pack it all up again. And it takes us 3 days to set it up and about 4 or 5 hours to de-rig it all. And it's amazing what Bob and Joe Blaisdell and everybody pitches in. It's particularly on teardown for the guys. Except Bob doesn't like anybody touching his cables. He likes to do all his cables himself, which I kind of understand that. But we help lump and stuff around and stuff like that. So anyway, that was the start of that. So great question. Thank you very much indeed. Commentary boxes of the world that we have seen. There'll be more actually. You're going to set that. You'll have set me off now on that. Let me see. Commentating on many great championships. What's been the one that stuck out long in your memory for any reason? Jesse, thank you. Well, that comes back to what we said before. But there's some good things, some bad things. I saw a good mate of mine and some good friends of mine at RML and Warren Hughes. Warren won 2, RML won 3 in the secondary prototype class down 3 years. I worked for Ray and Ray Mallet Racing when I first moved down to this part of the country in end of 1999 and worked for a couple of years and had a lot of time. So that was very emotional, particularly seeing your mates win, seeing people that you've known for a long time or people whose careers you've followed. I got to see and talked to Mark Webber at his last race at in the WEC, which was his last professional race, and I'd seen his early career in British on the British touring cars with Formula Ford, done all his interviews. So that's unusual. We've seen somebody go through their whole career. Very good. And I can't ever forget the year that Alan Simonson was killed, and what a great job the whole team did at Le Mans that year to continue to be professional and keep it going, keep the race going. Remember that for the wrong reasons, much as the team did when Beef was killed on the Rally GB as well, when we were doing that. Michael Park in the co-driver in the Peugeot, of course. Those are bad memories for the incidents, but great memories of what a great set of people and what a professional and hard-working set of people we work with, and people who have got emotions and can work through that and make sure that it all happens. All the things I said about favourite races, first things as well. First time I opened a show on television, on broadcast television. That was pretty cool. I've done some stuff with ITV here in the UK. Obviously, the stuff in Australia that we do. Getting asked to do the opener for the 12 hours. The big dum-dum-dum, dum-dum-dum-dum, and then me doing the voiceover for, that opener, which goes out on national television and around the world. That's pretty cool. Those are some good memories. Just the people I work with as well, and some of the great passers that I've seen. I've been very fortunate. There's a lot to be thankful for there, Jesse, to be honest. Richard, hello, Richard Westhead. Thanks for coming along at the members' meeting at the Oxford of the 12 hours. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you as well. That's one of the highlights. I love doing stuff like that. I really do. Wandering through the campsites at Le Mans, having a glass of something cool and chatting to people. And I think it's important that we all do that. All of our team, it's good to keep grounded with you guys, but also to keep finger on the pulse of what you are thinking. You're our audience. You're our consumers, if you will. Any more plans in the future to get behind the wheel, he says. Are you offering, Richard? I deliberately keep my license, even though I don't use it very often. At best, probably 1, 2 or 3 times a year, and I don't think I got out at all last year. I'm qualified up to international FIA International C. If I do another international race again, in fact, no, my last one was 17, so that's too far back. But I could be International B if I do one international race. So it's at a level now that I'm an international that I won't necessarily fall back from that. I'm a guaranteed bronze, by the way. Any GT3 teams who are reading or listening this. Just with my age now, I've got to get the full medical with the stress ECG and all that kind of stuff for a UK renewal of that. But my basic mantra for that, Richard, is the answer's probably going to be yes. Eve's very understanding, as long as it's not interfering too much with work, and that I can give the drive the respect that it deserves. I don't think I'm one of the greatest lost talents of motor racing. I drive spiritedly, have done since I was a youngster, probably driving a lot less so now. No, an awful lot less so now. But I love track driving. I love being given the opportunity to test or race cars. And it's a real pleasure to do that, and that's absolutely only come from what I do in my quote-unquote day job. All I ask normally is if it's something that I have no experience of, that maybe get a bit of a test in it to see if I'm going to get on with it. And if I'm going into a championship at the late end of the season, to be honest, I don't need to be 5 seconds off the back of the grid to prove anything, and I do not want to be a moving chicane. It's not what I do, and that's not because of my ego. I could just imagine what I'd be saying if I was commentating in the commentary box, and that's somebody that's getting in the way of the championship, and I never, it's not required, and it's not required of me. So I know I'm not going to be the fastest, but if I can get a little bit of experience of the car and the track, then if I can be in the midfield somewhere, then I'm normally pretty happy to go out and race with people. Most recently, the thing that I've done that was different, very different, is I did a Radical SR3, and I've never driven something with that kind of downforce before, and that was a real learning experience, but I thoroughly enjoyed it, and it gave me the confidence to go and do other things and take on other things. Again, they were good enough, Radical were good enough to give me a test day at Donington before I raced there over the weekend. Did 3 races over the weekend, all on my own actually, really enjoyed it. So if the opportunity arises, yes. Till Bechtelsheimer was kind enough to give me a go in his Chevron B8 at the Silverstone Classic Festival, which I know is not called that anymore, a couple of editions ago, and I'd never driven anything like that before, and it makes me realise that I'd like to do some more of the old stuff, stuff that moves around, stuff that you need to heel and toe on, and that I really, really enjoyed that. It was very wet. I did manage to fall off the track but not hit anybody, which was good news. I was avoiding a car that was out of position actually, because qualifying was odd, and one of the Lola prototypes was blasting through the GT field at the back and dived down the inside of me going into at the end of the Wellington Straight anyway, at the left-hander there, and so I managed to get out of his way, but then managed to end up facing in the wrong direction doing that. But I still had a great race, and I chased down a couple of people and made a couple of passes in the end, and that's great. That's what it's all about, and I think it's good that I can keep doing that, and I will try and keep doing that, because I think that I've got a pretty high regard for anybody who goes racing cars. But every time I get in a racing car and go and do it, it just adds to that regard and times it by about another 100%, because it is very hard, particularly in mixed category racing, and I loved racing in mixed category racing, and it's really, I think it's really good for me to get some perspective. I always like to walk or drive the tracks if I'm going to a new track and I'm going to be calling the races on it, so that I can see the surface changes, I can see the curbs you can use, I can see where potential problems are going to be, where the cambers aren't right. I think it helps that I ride a motorbike. I can spot camber changes pretty quickly. I ride a motorbike on the road. Don't even get me started about motorcycle races, by the way. They're just differently wired. So I'd love to, is the answer to that, Richard. And so long as it fits in with everything else, and that I don't compromise either side of it. So, for example, when I went and did the 24-hour race back in 2017 now, my goodness, at Cota with Aston Martin Lagonda, I stepped away from commentating that weekend because I wanted to concentrate on the driving, because it was a fantastic opportunity that Aston EML gave me. And I didn't want to have to be splitting my time. I'm a bear of a fairly small brain, so I wanted to make sure that I could concentrate on what was going on. Ryan Campbell, hello, and well done for all your work on the site and on the Facebook page, Ryan. I'd like to ask, completely off topic, what's your favourite album of all time? Oh my goodness, that's like what's your favourite race, isn't it? All right, some very obvious ones, because there's not going to be one. You can't have a favourite album. How do you feel on a particular day? What's your favourite song? What's your favourite car, even? How do you feel on a particular day? Right, I'm looking over behind me in the studio that does have some CDs on it, but mostly DVDs there now. The CD and the vinyl collections all in storage. Well, one album that I've got on, I think, every medium it's ever been released would be Fleetwood Mac and Rumours, because obviously I'm of that age. So vinyl, I've got at least 2 vinyl copies of that. I have a CD, I have it on download. Don't think I've got it on mini disc, mind you. If it did come out on mini disc, I mean that's a pretty obvious one. It's been a while, if I'm honest, since I bought any albums. I listen to a lot of radio in the car, and I like the variety that radio stations give me. Even radio stations that don't have talking. A lot of digital radio stations now, of course, that just play the tunes. Listen, with me being in the States a lot, I listen to Sirius XM an awful lot. And, you know, you can pick the genre you want there. So I listen to some of the pop stations over there, the Pulse and the Blend, but also the Highway, which is their new country station. And I know people are going to be laughing at me saying that already, but country is a broad church, and I quite like it. I like the collaborative nature of country music. I like the storytelling of music, and I like singer-songwriters as well. I've always liked singer-songwriters. But even when I was listening to music, and of course you might not know this, of course I used to play music for a living. I was a club DJ, worked in commercial and BBC radio in the UK, so played records in clubs for dancing, played records on radio for talking around. But even then, I used to like to listen to a variety of things, and listening to one album, I haven't really done for a long time. Dire Straits, probably another album that I think I've got on every format. When I think back to Martin Knopfler from my part of the world in the UK, of course, and I managed to get to see them live once by accident when I was in a nightclub in the middle of nowhere in the northeast of England, and they turned up, or they were doing a little live set in a nightclub. So this was a nightclub in the proper sense of a nightclub, where you went in, you drank, and you could have something to eat. The licensing laws allowed you to serve drink later if you were sitting having something to eat, and you'd have some entertainment on. And they came on and did effectively in a semi-acoustic set, getting ready for their next concert tour. They weren't massive then, but they were well known, so that was pretty cool. I wasn't expecting that. So Dire Straits, Making Movies album's pretty good. And as I say, I remember getting that on a CD back in the days when I was working for Hospital Radio. We had a trial of a Philips CD player, and that was one of the albums that they sent. I remember playing it on early days of cassette players in cars, playing the Supertramp Breakfast in America album over and over again, and having to turn the cassette over because I didn't have an auto reverse cassette in those days. But when I did have my own music in cars, and I mean nowadays it's hard to find a car that's even got a CD player, isn't it? Let's be honest. But I used to have a 10-disc. In fact, it's behind me. It was in a couple of my cars, and a Kenwood 10-disc, which went under the seat or in the boot, and a head unit. And I had that in my 405 SRI Peugeot, and I certainly had it in. I must have had it in my first Jag as well, my first 6-cylinder XJ. And I'd put artist albums in that, but mostly I'd put compilation albums in for that very reason. Now that's what I call music type of thing, or the best of blues and soul, etc., etc. Because I liked the variety. So I'm very excited about the new Rolling Stones album, and it's had good write-ups. So that is on my wish list for birthday and Christmas. And I think the previous last one I had for that would be for my birthday a couple of years ago. He bought me the then new Bruce Springsteen album, and I was going on a journey actually in the 993, and I didn't realise that car even had a CD player, and I found it by accident. It was behind a little drop down on the Blaupunkt in the car. So I put that in, and I played it just on repeat for pretty much the whole of the journey on the way up. And that's the way I used to listen to albums. That's the way we've all done it, isn't it? you'd rush out and get the new album, that beautiful smell of vinyl, of new vinyl when it came out, and you'd play it, you'd turn it over, you'd play it, you'd turn it over, you'd play it, and then if you were anything like me, you'd record it straight onto cassette, and then you'd play it in the car, do the same thing, just keep listening to it, so that you could learn all the words and all of that sort of thing. And I honestly don't have a lot of time to do that anymore. When I'm on a plane, I'm either working or sleeping. But I've started to get back into music recently, so maybe a little bit more time to do that. The best and the worst thing about having a relatively new car is internet radio, and the 992 is connected, and so. And I've managed to put a digital receiver in the older cars, in all the older cars. So my 968 now has got an old style looking radio, Continental radio, but it's got a DAB radio, digital radio here. And basically you stick it on a channel and that's that. And it just plays music that you're comfortable with. We've got a station here in the UK which launched relatively recently, which is called Greatest Hits Radio. And it's got a huge number of presenters, DJs, that I grew up listening to, mostly from the BBC and some from commercial radio, but the ones that I know the best are originally from the BBC, because we didn't have a lot of commercial radio up in the northeast. In fact, Metro Radio, where I started working up there years ago, they were the first, and I think they still are the biggest in terms of their transmission service area. And they play 70s, 80s and 90s, and that's all they play on Greatest Hits Radio. And of course, that's right in my wheelhouse. So, a difficult question, that. I'm now, you know what I'm going to do now, don't you, Ryan? I'm going to have to go down to the unit. I've got a couple of adder boxes of CDs that were my favourite CDs that I used to throw in the back of the car. And there'll be some artist albums in there. And I've got a couple of big 12-inch boxes of vinyl. And my albums were catalogued away from my work in inverted commas records. So 7-inch and 12-inch singles. So now you're going to make me go back. Yes, 902. No, what was it? Yes was not 902, 109. Oh, my goodness. What was the... It was the was it Yes? Oh, I'm going to have to look that one up now. See, you've started it. 90125 was the 11th studio album by Yes. I loved that. Played that one to bits. Styx, a few Styx albums I played to bits. Liked a bit of Stadium Rock. Foreigner. Oh, Lou Graham's voice. Oof, yes. Now you see, I'm going to be going back and digging out. This is going to you're going to cause trouble now with the responsible adult, because I'm going to go and reclaim some stuff from the storage unit and add it to the man cave. Tom Firth. Hello, Tom. How are you? Question on Australian GT Series, Fanatec World Challenge GT4 Australia, as it appears in the media. SRO become wholly the owners of the championship. How does the Bathurst 12 Hours become the tide that lifts all boats and helping to build a profile and interest in the domestic national championship? Oh man, isn't that the $60 million question? And I'm not sure there's a single answer. There's certainly not a one size fits all answer. Ask Stefan Rattel. Look at how difficult they have found building specific SRO events. They Spa, yeah, they took that on and they've run with it and it's been good. Bathurst they've been involved with. They're going to be involved with the Nürburgring 24 Hours, but they persist with the Indianapolis event, and that's kind of starting to get a bit of traction now. But it takes time. It takes time, and it's a chicken and egg situation, Tom, isn't it? Because in the States, you've got a national championship that has got a little bit of traction, a little bit more than it had a few years ago. Does that provide the water for the tide that lifts the Indianapolis 8 Hours? Or do you have the big event and hope it trickles down from that into the national series? And that's the same question you've got to ask with the Australian GT series, a new GT4 series for Australia, I think is a very interesting concept. I think that GT4 series around the world, possibly other than in Michelin Pilot Challenge in IMSA, are woefully underrepresented for the type of cars, the type of racing that you get, for the cost of it, the relative cost of it. Particularly with the new crop of GT3s, those are expensive cars to buy. Those are expensive cars to run per kilometre. It seemed for a while that the gap between GT3 and GT4 narrowed a little bit, and therefore a lot of people skipped out on GT4 and went forward straight into GT3. I think that gap will widen again. It's a tough question, and I don't think there's one answer, Tom. Coverage is one thing, costs are another. Motorsport is a broad church, but endurance racing motorsport is a niche within motorsport. And I suppose motorsport within the whole broad spectrum of sport is a niche in itself, isn't it? So we're a niche within a niche in some respects. The thing that GT racing has got going for it, I think, and I'm not sure that this has ever been exploited, and I use that word advisedly, to the best advantage, is that generally speaking, the cars that are out there are aspirational. They are cars that you look at and say, yeah, if I drop the Powerball, if I win the lotto at the weekend, then I'm having a Ferrari 296, or I'm having an Aston Martin, or I'm having a Bentley, or whatever it is. And in the UK, the glory years of the Touring Car Championship was because people identified with the cars, because in the Talker years and the Super Touring years, those were the cars that were given out as company cars. So the company car driver, the rep, who was covering hundreds of miles a day, a week, a month, thousands of miles a month, was driving the Cavalier, was driving the Volvo estate car, wherever it was. If you were very lucky, you were in a BMW 3 Series, weren't you? Although actually they produced more BMW 3 Series than they did Ford Sierras, I seem to remember. Certainly sold more in the UK. However, I digress. Unusual for me, I know. So that was familiarity, and that was the children of those people who drove them. Oh, that's my dad's car on the track. I think you can sort of take that and move it on and go, but that's the car I'd really like. And they do look like cars. There's the excitement and the exclusivity of Formula One. In Australia in particular, you've got the heritage and the tribalism of V8s. GTs are still relatively the new kids on the block, aren't they? And you've got to do something. They're expensive cars in Australia because of the import taxes. Although, all the Australians immediately say, don't open that Pandora's box when I say this. Why you need all those import taxes now? Because you haven't got an Australian-based car industry to protect, and therefore it didn't work. Just an outsider's view, although I've had that discussion with a number of people. But they're expensive cars. So maybe they're a bit elitist, I don't know. But you have to tell the stories. I still think they're cars that are beautiful. I still think that they are cars that you can relate to the showroom versions of. There's some great characters. Always in Australian sport, and particularly in Australian motorsport, there's always great characters. And then you add in, and I think this comes to the point of your question, you add in the opportunity to have that international influx for the 12 hours, and where the Australasian Antipodean driver set get the opportunity to measure themselves against, and the teams get to measure themselves against the best in the world in equal machinery. And that's a story that I think is being told by the TV. It's the thing we always look at in the editorial meetings, and where are the matchups, and where are those storylines. And I think those very human, very personal storylines is what people get into in sport. Get outside of the tribalism, get outside of the national rugby, cricket, the why I mentioned those two as an Englishman recently. That was poor of me, wasn't it? But soccer, whatever. Get outside of that. I'm red and white. He's black and white. I'm England. He's Aussie. He's Australia. He's New Zealand. Get out of that and get down to telling some stories. I think there's a job for all of us to do as the teams, the drivers, the series, the manufacturers. It would help if we saw a little more from the manufacturers, for sure. Some do it better than others in GT racing. Fans, journalists, fans, we've got stories to tell. And we've got, it's almost beholden to us, isn't it? Beholden to us to say, I think you should be watching this because it's exciting. And when you do watch it, we've got to make it exciting and we've got to tell the stories. I do not subscribe to the idea that multi-class racing is too difficult for people and long distance racing is too long for people because young people have got short attention spans. I don't subscribe to that. I think it's how you present it to them. And our numbers on Radio Show Limited don't bear that out. Our audience is getting younger, not getting older. There's more people coming in at the bottom end of the age scale than are popping off at the top. And our levels of audience for audio and all the video stuff, visual stuff that we're involved in, the World Feed TVs and stuff like that, they're all going up. 30% uplift on IMSA World Feed TV last year. That's significant. We still, on IMSA, we're still getting more and more people right across the world that are interested in it. I think you have to present it in the right way. So no simple answer. Marty De Pascale. 2 questions. What was your first ever motorsport event you attended? Possibly as a spectator? That's very good. I'll come back to that. How do you manage to get into the motorsport commentary industry? Hang on. I'm already nearly 80 minutes in. Long story short, I was working in hospital radio, and a friend of mine, Joe Bradley, who commentates with us, he was karting at the time. His karting club had a major national series come, and they needed a working PA system. And so we had some very clever technical people, and me and our technical officer for the hospital radio, which was all charitable and volunteers, we went up there, we fixed up their old 100-volt line PA system, we refurbed the commentary box, we put some bits and pieces in, and then, having done that, they need somebody to talk about racing. So me originally, and then me and Joe, because he had stopped racing by then, we went and did commentary on the PA, and that's how I started doing commentary. But my real break was going to Le Mans. I'd done quite a lot of karting, I'd done some rallycross, but my real break was going to Le Mans. I went there as a music DJ and a presenter, and the person who sat in the booth and linked everything and said, and now down to Martin Haven in the pits, or said, thank you, Ian, thank you, Paul. We'll be back with our commentators in a moment after these words from our local sponsors. Well, we never said that, and then played the ads on the old cartridge machines. That was in the early days of Le Mans. So that was 89. I first went to Le Mans. What was the first? And basically from then, I've been very fortunate. In some ways, I've been in the right place at the right time. In some ways, because I've looked at things slightly differently, and I have had professional broadcast experience. I got my broadcast technique was taken apart and put back together again by the BBC, for which I am forever grateful, because those cornerstones that I learned at the Beeb I use them every day, and I try to impart them to others. And you go back to Lord Reith, and it's explain, inform, entertain. Those are the three three principles that you use there, and there's various building blocks that you put on top of that. What was the first? I'm coming back to my first one. Don't worry, I haven't forgotten. And sometimes because I've been different, my accent was what got me. For many years, when I was trying to get into professional radio, I was told that I couldn't get into professional radio with a regional accent from the United Kingdom, and particularly from the northeast of England. It's bizarre now because you can barely get a job in TV or radio in the UK if you haven't got a quite strong regional accent. Actually, is almost de rigueur. So I spent a long time trying to lose it, and then decided that I wasn't going to do that. And as it happens, at Le Mans in, I think, 95 or 96 probably, 97 it would have been, Dom Panos heard me on Radio Le Mans, where I was basically being the anchor man and the presenter and all that sort of stuff. And because I sounded different from everybody else, mine was the voice he remembered. Because I don't have the typical English BBC received pronunciation RP. Hello and welcome to the BBC. We're broadcasting to the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth. And here is the news. I don't sound like that, and most commentators did sound like that in those days. Most people who worked in motorsport. In fact, famously, I was told that I would never make it because I didn't have a Silverstone voice, and I haven't got a voice suitable for Silverstone. I'd never make it in motorsport commentary. Yes. And then that started the American thing. The American thing, I started to get involved in production and understanding where we had to be and looking at different ways of getting to an audience, and that begat the internet, of course. Le Mans begat the internet when I was working on that, and then Radio Web and doing more and more, and then Radio Show Limited, which is coming up for 20 years old in 2026, will be 20 years old, and taking control of our own destiny in to a greater extent, and therefore it's only taken me about 45 years to get from where I wanted to be to where I am now. So 45 years to be the overnight sensation that is John Hindaugh commentator. When I think back to my teenage years, I always thought I was going to be on Radio 1. Noel Edmonds look it up, was one of my heroes. I thought he was a brilliant broadcaster. Now, first motorsport event as a spectator. I don't do spectating generally. However, I do remember when Croft reopened in the northeast of England, I used to go down, and it didn't reopen as a racetrack. It was a rallycross circuit, and so I would go to I'd go down to Croft and watch the rallycross, and I'm trying to think. That would have been maybe 1986, 1987. And I say that because it was all the Group B cars. So I'd done that before. It was 1987. I've just found it on YouTube. 1987 Internations Rallycross event. It finished in the near dark because it was in sort of this time of the year, late October. And there were, it was unbelievable. Seppo Nitin-Markey, Matti Alamarki, Dimi Mavropoulos, Martin Schenker, of course. 6R4s, RS2000s, all the Group P supercars. Pretty certain we had a Delta F4. Alamarki, I think, had a Lancia Delta S4. I now know what I'm doing for the next hour and 46 minutes is I'm watching that back because I'm on the bankside there with my Hillman Avenger. I would drive down to Croft. Sometimes Joe Bradley would come with me. I met Joe Bradley. Although we went to school together and we knew of each other. He was older than me, so he was in the year above me. He's only 6 months older than me, Joe, but that fell the way in the school year to be older than me, and I've never let him forget it, and he always tries to say that he's 3 years younger than me, which is quite funny. But I met Joe spectating at met him properly spectating at a Croft Rallycross event. So I would probably think it's almost certainly a Croft Rallycross event, probably a British Championship, maybe just one of the regional series in about 85, 86 when it first reopened. That would be somewhere there. And I look forward to seeing you in February as well, Marty. Hopefully I'm there. Thank you very much, everybody. Love the support that you give us. And hopefully we'll see some of you down at the Oxford or wherever we choose. We've got our friends at Reckless Brewing now at Bathurst, which is sort of become Crailsy's on-site office. With good reason, in fairness. Nathan and the guys down there are absolutely outstanding. To all you shakedowners, keep shaking and try not to get too down, and enjoy your motorsport. I'll be tuned in to the Gold Coast this weekend and enjoying the end of the V8 season. And don't forget, we've still got WEC Bahrain in audio for you, always unblocked, as you know. And in sound and vision, we'll have the Kuwait 12 hours as well, which is a couple of weeks after that. Local listings for details, as they say. Thanks to Brad and the rest of the team for asking me on. Have a good one, and if we don't speak to you before, have a great Christmas and New Year period and a fabulous 2024. Bye-bye.